Imagine waking up in a world where every sound, every glance, even a fleeting shadow, triggers paralyzing terror. This was the grim reality for millions under Nazi Germany, where fear was engineered with ruthless precision. Not just a feeling, but a weapon. If you've been following this series on psychological manipulation, you know fear can be the most devastating tool of all. Today, we're diving into the dark psychology of fear conditioning, revealing how terror is covertly programmed into the human mind to control entire populations. Fear conditioning is a powerful psychological process where a neutral stimulus becomes associated with a frightening event, causing an automatic fear response to the stimulus alone. Think about the sound of sirens or certain slogans. They might seem harmless at first, but through repeated exposure paired with trauma or threat, these cues trigger intense anxiety or panic. The roots of fear conditioning trace back to early behavioral experiments, but its real potency emerges when wielded as a tool of mass control. Historically, authoritarian regimes discovered that fear conditioning could break down individual autonomy by embedding fear into everyday life, creating a culture of submission. What makes this dark psychological weapon especially insidious is its subtlety. The conditioning is not always obvious or explicit. Instead, it creeps into the collective subconscious through propaganda, public rituals, and controlled social environments. And if you've watched our previous episodes on paranoia induction and mass panic, you know these tactics often overlap, creating a complex web of psychological traps. Fear conditioning doesn't just manipulate thoughts. It hijacks the body's primal survival mechanisms, making resistance feel impossible. One of the most chilling examples of fear conditioning in history occurred in Nazi Germany. The regime didn't just rule by brute force. They engineered fear through systematic psychological conditioning. Luftwaffe sirens, public speeches drenched in threat, and the omnipresence of the Gestapo created an environment where ordinary noises and sights became Pavlovian triggers of terror. These weren't random acts. They were deliberate tools to fracture trust and enforce obedience. Citizens learned to associate subtle cues, like a neighbor's silence or a passing glance, with imminent danger of denunciation or arrest. Camps, checkpoints, and propaganda broadcasts were fixtures reinforcing a continuous cycle of dread. But here's where it gets disturbing. This conditioning extended beyond immediate fear. It created a social paralysis, where suspicion suffocated community bonds and made resistance nearly impossible. Families were torn apart, and individuals self-censored out of survival instinct. In this dark dance of power, fear conditioning was the invisible leash controlling millions. This case isn't just history. It's a template repeated in many contexts where fear is weaponized to suppress and divide. So how exactly does fear conditioning work under the hood? At its core, it exploits the brain's learning and memory systems, especially the amygdala, the fear center responsible for rapid threat detection. When a neutral stimulus consistently predicts danger, the brain forms a strong neural link, so the stimulus alone can trigger an adrenaline flood. Increased heart rate, tunnel vision, muscle tension. This physiological hijacking primes victims to react reflexively, bypassing rational thought. Propagandists and manipulators understand and exploit this deeply. They pair innocuous images, sounds, or slogans with threatening messages repeatedly, embedding fear triggers. Over time, these conditioned fears become generalized, spreading to broader concepts or unrelated contexts to deepen psychological control. Take, for instance, how Cold War propaganda paired the image of a missile with the concept of existential threat to America. This isn't just messaging. It's behavioral conditioning at scale. What's even more unsettling is that fear conditioning can be self-reinforcing. Once these neural pathways form, individuals scan environments for conditioned cues, reinforcing paranoia and anxiety cycles. This mechanistic trap explains why fear manipulations are so hard to break free from once entrenched. Understanding this neural hijack is crucial, especially for recognizing how modern media and governments continue applying these principles with subtlety and precision. But here's where it gets disturbing. During the Cold War, Both sides waged not just military conflict, but psychological warfare using fear conditioning to sway entire populations. The United States government strategically used fear of communist invasion, nuclear annihilation, and espionage, conditioning citizens to associate everyday objects, like fallout shelters, drills, or media imagery, with impending doom. Campaigns inundated households with sirens, mandatory drills in schools, and recurring headlines that fused familiar elements with catastrophic outcomes. These stimuli triggered conditioned anxiety, turning daily life into a constant high-alert state. The goal was clear: control public opinion, justify military spending, and suppress dissent. This wasn't mere paranoia. It was engineered psychological control. But it didn't stop at governments. Private organizations, news outlets, and entertainment media perpetuated and amplified this conditioned fear, creating a feedback loop that blurred reality with propaganda. Versus them mentalities, fueling suspicion even between neighbors. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. Fear conditioning wasn't just top-down social networks, embedding itself deeply in citizens' psyche. This Cold War example reveals the long-term consequences of fear conditioning. A culture shaped less by facts and more by emotional contagion and conditioned terror. Now here's what nobody tells you. Fast forward to today, and fear conditioning has evolved with technology, but the psychological patterns remain strikingly similar. Contemporary media, news, social platforms, even entertainment use repeated fear-inducing stimuli to capture attention and shape beliefs. Headlines about pandemics, terrorism, economic collapse are paired with alarming visuals and urgent cues that trigger conditioned fear responses. Notifications, alerts, and viral content act like modern sirens, flooding our brains with anxiety triggers. This continuous exposure creates a baseline of heightened vigilance and often irrational fears, impacting decision-making on personal, societal, and political levels. What's even more unsettling is the personalization of fear conditioning through algorithms that tailor and reinforce specific fears based on your reactions. This feedback loop amplifies division, paranoia, and compliance. It's no coincidence that many leaders and influencers exploit these conditioned fears to rally support or silence opposition. Understanding this modern landscape reveals why fear remains one of the most potent tools of control. But here's what nobody tells you. Breaking free requires more than awareness. It demands deliberate psychological defense and community resilience strategies. That's what we'll explore next. Recognizing and resisting fear conditioning starts with awareness of the triggers designed to hijack your emotional responses. Pay attention to repeated cues linked to anxiety in media, social interactions, and public messaging. Practicing mindfulness helps slow the amygdala's reflexive fear response, allowing you space to differentiate between conditioned fear and real threats. Critical thinking and fact-checking are your best defenses against manipulated fear narratives. Building strong social connections and discussing fears openly counters isolation and paranoia created by fear conditioning. Importantly, limit overexposure to sensationalized or fear-heavy media. Seek balanced, nuanced information sources. Remember, fear conditioning operates beneath conscious awareness, so deliberate mental exercises to reframe fearful stimuli can weaken the neural pathways formed. Empowering yourself means reclaiming your emotional autonomy and resisting the weaponization of fear that has shaped history and continues infiltrating modern life. Today's exploration of fear conditioning reveals an unsettling truth. Fear is not just a feeling. It's a methodically engineered tool of control, wielded across decades by regimes and media alike. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, next week we're going even deeper into how those conditioned fears can be exploited to cripple democratic freedoms in subtle ways you haven't imagined. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss this crucial chapter in understanding how dark psychology shapes our world.